So I've seen that a lot of people have this idea that reflection really depends on asking the right question. And sure, that can certainly be part of the process of engaging in kind of depth oriented self reflection, right? There's tons of spreads out there, particularly like for tarot. But what I think matters just as much, and sometimes even more so, is how you answer those prompts or those questions, or how you engage in that process of exploration, because the exact same prompt can lead to somewhere completely different depending on the format that you use to answer or to explore that question, right? So I'm just going to give an example of some different ways that can be used to answer one, fairly neutral prompt, to kind of show you how different ways of answering can lead to completely different reactions and go to different places. So, you can start with something fairly neutral, like, what feels most present for me right now, or, what has my attention lately, or, what energy am I bringing into the day. And a lot of people will, just go and pull a tarot card randomly to kind of answer that question. Oh, I got the Fool or the Moon or the Two of Cups. What does this mean? And then maybe even they go to generic, or not generic, but kind of like standard, what does the card mean, from an external source, or they go to the guidebook, instead of really kind of sitting with this question and exploring or answering it in a more meaningful and personal way. So I'm going to go through 4 different ways that you could try to do that, right? So let's just go with a prompt, like what feels most present for me right now, right? So version number 1 is just words. So that's just answering normally, right? So what feels most present for me right now? I'm just going to grab my journal. I'm going to write 2 to 3 sentences, just kind of standard, normally off the top of my head, what feels the most present for me right now. Pretty straightforward, right? So that is one way, and it's all these ways are valid, right? There's no like wrong way, but the idea is that these give different types of information. So that gives one type of information. So another way to answer that, what feels the most present for me right now, is to answer using only colors. So maybe, I like to bring in a lot of creative constraints, right, in my pocket portals process, so that I'm not sitting here journaling like endlessly. But what feels the most present for me right now? Just answering it in 3 colors, right? And then maybe kind of reflecting, rereading that, kind of like interesting, right? Like it feels different. And part of that process is I'm noticing, maybe my mood before I'm putting like language and interpretation on it. I'm kind of having this different way of relating to my inner experience by just using color to describe it. Okay. A third version number 3 is using metaphor and or object. So doing that is answering only with objects, right? So maybe what's present for me right now, and 3 objects like a cracked teacup, or a dusty mirror, or a flashlight, right? So again, 3 objects, right? And so that's changing that experience again, right? Now we're starting to think symbolically and metaphorically instead of literally, okay? And then version or way, I guess this is off camera, for the 4th method is now if you want to bring in that tarot or that oracle experience, this is with the 4th version. So I'm going to use a Dixit card because I just have a Dixit deck right here in front of me. And so this is a way of approaching that same question, right, with a card pull, right? And so the kind of the process here is that instead of generating my own response, right, in those 3 versions, even though they were different kind of formats, it was still coming from my own self, right? I'm going to generate my response using something external, right? I'm going to pull a card. And you can certainly do this randomly, or intentionally. I'm not going to go into, you know, kind of using different ways of card pulling in this video. I have lots of other videos that talk about how different ways of choosing cards can in themselves lead to different reactions or different responses, or bring up something different, right? So different ways of choosing, bring up different, create different experiences, really. So I'm just gonna, you know, for the purposes of this video, I'm just gonna pull a card randomly, right? So I got this one. This is a Dixit, I think, Kids. This is a Dixit Kids set that just came out recently. But as you can see, it's this like kind of ghost trapped in a lantern, which is kind of a very interesting image, right? So again, I also have lots of different ways in my video, or also different videos to talk about different ways of working with imagery in a much more personal and meaningful way, rather than looking up, you know, external sources, which is particularly helpful if you're using something like Dixit, which doesn't come with a guidebook. But just generally, you know, I might sit with this image and think about, you know, what about this image connects to my current situation. Maybe, you know, making a list of associations that come up that I have to this image, you know, what it like sparks me to think about, what stands out to me in the image, you know, any kind of like details that catch my attention, maybe thinking about, you know, the ghost, you know, how it feels, where this is. Does the image remind me of anything? And then is there anything about this image that feels surprising, particularly when I'm connecting it to that question about what feels the most present for me right now. So kind of part of what I like about an approach like this, where I'm using an external object, right, and could even use charms, is that I'm not thinking about the question directly, right? I'm kind of using something external, in this case the image, to kind of reshape and kind of guide my own process, right? So yeah, so that was kind of showing you, you know, one question, 4 different ways of responding. Of course, there are, you know, many more, but the point is that each way of responding brought something different forward. And so the interesting aspect to me is that reflection, particularly deep personal reflection, it's not just about asking better questions or coming up with different, you know, tarot spreads. Sometimes that shift happens when we change how we are engaging with the question itself. So that's something that I personally explore a lot in my own work, in groups, you know, using imagery, writing, symbolism, creative constraints, and really kind of, you know, maybe unusual reflective practices. I draw a lot from improv and, of course, my training in drama therapy. So if this way of reflecting interests you, feel free to subscribe to my channel, where I share lots of new explorations here regularly.